Clayton Mitchell.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I rise on behalf of New Zealand First in solid opposition to this piece of legislation. And to be brutally honest, I think this government's got more cheek than an overweight politician's backside, putting lipstick on this pig and calling it somehow fiscally responsible, looking after the best interests of all New Zealanders, I think is irresponsible. Mr Speaker, to be brutally honest, I've been sitting here for the last 35 minutes and have been struggling, my ears have been deceiving me, and hearing all this objection from this side of the House towards this bill, and yet we're hearing a lot of support for it, and with regards to the Greens and Labor. And I shake my head in disbelief that we're the only party in opposition to this bill because it doesn't do what they're saying it's going to do. And I'm just going to step you through that today, Mr Speaker. They do say one thing and they put down something completely different. We're talking about the Accident Compensation, Financial Responsibility and Transparency Amendment Bill. And I go back to a number of speeches that have already been made in this House over the last couple of weeks, particularly in the last 24 hours, Mr Speaker, about those two sets of words there, financial responsibility and transparency. And they've been heroed in this bill, in the title of this bill, which I actually think is the best part of the bill, to be fair, as the title, to make it sound that this is some sort of new idea that the government should be fiscally responsible and transparent. In actual fact, I expect that from a government at all times. And what we're seeing and what we're going to continue to see is less transparency and muddying of the waters. Now, to move forward, you must look behind you and find out where you've made mistakes, where you've gone wrong. You need to apologise for those mistakes moving forward, and you need to make good on some of the issues that have caused so many problems around the country in relation to the accident compensation levies that have been overcharged. Many businesses, many people have been overpaying these levies for such a long time, and nothing in this bill, Mr Speaker, nothing at all suggests or says definitively that this is actually going to take place, that those levies are actually going to come down. Mr Speaker, a transparent government is a government that does not hide behind the Order of Council provision. The Order of Council provision is probably one of the most insidious clauses that this government has got the gall to put out in not just this bill, Mr Speaker, but 798 other times in current legislation the Order of Council exists. I find that absolutely abhorrent. I think the rank and file New Zealanders find it absolutely abhorrent, and I think we need to take a good hard look at the way this government is not being transparent by using the Order of Council provision. Now, the Order of Council provision, Mr Speaker, is a very important part. The government is saying that those levies, the residual levies, are going to come down by 2019. And they may be decided by Order in Council to bring them forward, but in Order of Council they might decide to actually extend those out. And under current charges and levies that have been charged at the moment, you can expect in New Zealand, those people back home in small businesses between now and 2019, in 4 years, $1.475 billion to be over-collected over the next 4 years. And what about that over-collection? Where is that money going to go? Where is the transparency to let people know that, no, that money is going to come back to you? This is a government that is trying to cloud the issue of trying to create a surplus moving forward to the 2017 election and take the credit for it, using New Zealanders' hard-earned taxpayers' dollars to go into ACC, which it shouldn't be required. Mr Speaker, last night in the Committee of the Whole House stage, we raised a number of points relating to the word changes around Part 1 in the bill, and this is about 166A, Section 2, where when making recommendations in respect of regulations made under Section 329, setting levies, the Minister must have regard to the following principles, and those are the levies derived for each account. We've got if an account has a deficit of funds to meet the cost described, and large changes in levies. Now, you'd expect with such a solid opening statement in Part 2 of 166A that they would follow that through and actually consider that word must remaining. However, it's not remaining. They've changed the levies derived from each account from must to should meet the lifetime cost. If an account has a deficit of funds to meet the cost described, has accumulated surplus funds, that deficit or surplus should be corrected by setting of those Those are some serious changes. Now, we heard Mr Young stand up and justify that. I don't think that justification is anywhere near good enough. So, we do have some serious concerns around the wording of this bill, and even further around the final decisions being made about what those levies are going to look like. And we've got a flow diagram, which again I've discussed, and because this bill's been sort of rammed like a whiz-boing-bang-bounce game, it's very, very quick. We've rushed it through select committee. We've had not a lot of time to consider the evidence that we've had in, and a lot of people have said themselves they haven't had the time to actually bring their concerns forward and have a serious consideration with it. But the government's proposed levy-setting framework starts with the government sets funding policy targets, horizons and transitions. ACC then calculates the levies. Public and stakeholders consultation. Well, that sounds fantastic. Now we're talking about some engagement. So there's some positive things in this bill. And then the ACC board recommends the levies and the rates. Ministers for ACC also receives levy advice from MB and Treasury. The Cabinet sets new ACC levies, but then it goes to the final stages of the levy-setting framework, and it is all undone by simply the Cabinet may follow ACC's recommendations and the Cabinet may choose to get alternative rates. Yeah. Mr Speaker, order in council is a very worrying term, and it's a term that the United Nations Convention Against Corruption has come out and said that a government that uses this this particular ideology in its legislation is one that is stepping down the pathway of corruption.
Order. The member has, I think, used a big proportion of his speech about the order in council provisions of the bill. I've been searching the bill for them, and before the member starts on that again, I'd like him to point out where they are in the bill.
Mr Speaker, with regards to the residual levies, I think you'll find it is in Part 2 of the bill, in the section 336A, Part 1A and B, 1A and B. It's right there on page 5. So, Mr Speaker, just to continue on with what I've got to say here, the language is very important, and Mr Speaker, I think it's very important to raise that concern because it is in there, and the reality of there are a number of concerns within that Order of Council section, and it's not to be taken lightly. It's very much a serious concern. When we're moving forward in the bill and we hear the nonsense that's coming out now with the Health and Safety Reform Bill, and if you bear with me for a second, Mr Speaker, I don't want you to sit me down before I get to my point. When we talk about the Health and Safety Reform Bill, Mr Speaker, we heard the comments that are coming about what constitutes a high-risk industries, if you will. Now, we've had the same sort of cock-up, if you like, with the appointment of what cars are going to be high risk and low risk and what are going to be levied against. Mr Speaker, we have got that does relate to ACC levies. If they're talking about trying to reduce those ACC levies, Mr Speaker, then the reality is we are seeing a higher rate for cars that are far more common and therefore more affordable and cheaper. And to us, this is a taxation on the people that can afford that the least. We've got cars out there that are less popular and therefore cause less accidents on the roads, and yet you've got a little car like a Hyundai Getz, which even in the latest the information that's been put forward have not come out in support of the Hyundai Getz as being a car that should have lower rates. Now that is an affordable round-the-town car. It's low on emission, it's good for the environment, it takes up less car spaces, and it's affordable, and yet that doesn't show up there in the new amounts and the new cars that are actually designed to be having those lower emission rates. Mr Speaker, to conclude my presentation today, in true opposition to this bill, because there is a lot that's wrong with it. Even this on the opposition have come out and said it's not fit for purpose, it's window dressing. So I cannot fathom how Labor and the Greens cannot actually stand up here and oppose it with New Zealand First, because that is the only sensible option. However, we do support Sue Moroney's supplementary order papers. I think that is the most sensible thing that I've heard anything being discussed today in this House and with regards to this bill, and we will not and cannot support this bill moving forward. Thank you for your time, Mr Speaker. I hope you have a lovely afternoon.